most of her presentation. Tammy and I are with the library and we'll be facilitating and moderating the session today. Please use the chat for questions and Tammy will track those for later in the program when we do a Q&A. Please remain muted throughout the program. You'll be able to unmute later. Without further ado, I will introduce our guest for this evening. Julie is known for her common sense parenting and education advice. She's the author of the beloved book, The Brave Learner, which has brought joy and freedom to countless home educators. Her online coaching community, Brave Learner Home, the Brave Learner the Brave Writer podcast, and Julie's popular Instagram account are lifelines for tens of thousands of weary parents all over the world. Julie's also the creator of the award-winning, innovative online writing program called Brave Writer, now 21 years old, serving 191 countries. She home educated her 5 children who are now globe-trotting adults. Julie has also taught college freshmen at Xavier University and was honored their 2017 Mages Award for Outstanding Service to Society for her work in Brave Writer. Today, Julie lives in Cincinnati, Ohio, and can be found sipping a cup of tea while planning her next visit to one of her lifelong learning kids. Welcome, Julie. Please take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Tammy and Emma, for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here. I know there was a glitch with my schedule last time, and I apologize to those of you who showed up live and I wasn't there, but I am grateful for the opportunity to return and to meet with you tonight. So thank you very much for your grace and for being here. The chat is open. I encourage you to ask questions there, or if you would really love to leave me a question and you want to make sure that I get it, you can save it for the end and I will see it. When my PowerPoint is on, I won't be able to see the chat. So I will come back at the end and then we'll be able to hang out together. I'm going to turn on, well, actually, I was going to ask you, Tammy, do you want to turn on closed captions or are we good as they are? And thank you for being happy to have me. You would have to turn that on, I think, not me, but I just wanted to mention it in case that's something that you like to provide. Okay, so I'm Julie, and this is the book we are here to discuss. Obviously, I have it in several locations because, well, that's exactly what you do when you're a speaker and you've written a book. Raising Critical Thinkers was a work of passion and a long-term research project. I had the opportunity to live before the internet. Some of you listening, I bet, don't remember a lifetime before that, but I am 60 years old. So my first half of life, not even a little more than half my life, was spent without the internet. I was about 35, 36 when the World Wide Web opened. And at that time, I was a homeschooler. The people I knew who homeschooled met at park days and church events and hung out in person. And they were lovely people. We were nice to each other. If we had differences of opinion, we were polite about it. When the internet threw open its doors, suddenly homeschoolers were the first ones to rush in. We were isolated. There were fewer than 1 million families in the entire United States homeschooling in the early 90s. And we were starved for support, for advice, for curriculum reviews. We just wanted to connect. So everyone gathered at these 2 main discussion boards, what I would call almost like homeschool watering holes. We were a homogeneous group, by and large, similar race, similar politics, similar religion, stay-at-home mothers, husbands who worked. Like that was the world I was living in at the time. And so I assumed we would get online and it would just be delightful. And you know what? A lot of times it was. I made some of my very best lifelong friends during that season of homeschooling online, where it was brand new for all of us. But the one anomaly, the thing that kind of took my breath away once I spent time online, was how quickly a conversation could devolve into a fight. This was before we had language like trolling. So I would watch what erupted were mommy wars, right? Suddenly, we would have these parents in a complete fight over things like paper diapers versus cloth diapers, cesarean sections versus natural childbirth, politics, religion. And these were women who I thought were nice people, people who had always been nice when we had been at a park day. But suddenly there was something about the anonymity of typing. There was something else going on, and I didn't know what it was. And it became the subject of a fascination of mine. Why do we think we're right? And why do we think other people should listen to us? Why should they convert from their position to convert to my position? That seemed to be everybody's angle, right? I'm not saying that we never listened to each other or learned from each other. I'm saying that when the pressure was on, when the idea was something sacrosanct in our own imaginations, suddenly we felt it was our obligation to convert people. But what we've all seen, especially in the last 30 years of internet use, conversion is a terrible strategy. It rarely leads to harmonious relationships, intimacy, community, or shared beliefs. People come with their own frame of reference. And when we use conversion as a strategy, we are literally disregarding that frame of reference and expecting them to discard what was of value for them in order to adopt what is of value to me. So when I started thinking about the strangeness of the internet, I thought to myself, where does all this come from? How do we form our worldviews? Why do we hold these perspectives? What does it take to change perspectives? How many of you, just post in the chat, you can write yes or no. How many of you have undergone a change in thinking since you became an adult? So a way that you grew up or a way that you thought when you were a teenager that you have since revised, a belief, a habit of thought, a political opinion. Just put yes or no in the chat. I'm curious. I'm going to take a sip of water. 3 yeses so far. Any dissenters? Gosh, yes. Of course. Yes. Yes, I'm constantly learning. Right. Exactly. And in fact, the same rate of people that just shared that they have different views than when they were growing up, that's going to be true about your children. They're going to grow up and they're going to form some beliefs that are not the ones you've adopted. And of course, once we have children, don't we feel like, oh, well, I've arrived, I've worked on this worldview, and now I'm having children, so I'm going to impart it to them. And they are going to skip the step that I went through. They won't have to struggle, suffer, evaluate, go down a path that leads to a consequence that they'll regret later in their lives. I can just give them the shortcut to the right path. How many of you sort of secretly feel that way about parenting? Like, I'm going to save them some pain, some trouble. I'm going to put them on the right path because I've already figured out what it is. Anybody feel like that? Yeah. Autumn is honest because actually we all do. The moment that baby is in your arms, whether it's adopted or it's someone you gave birth to, or it's a baby even that you're fostering, this rush of ownership and this belief in the power of your ideals takes hold of you. And suddenly you see your children as the perfect subjects of what I call the parental propaganda program that we're all about to put our kids on. So before we dive into the book, I want to give you an example of what I mean by the parental propaganda program. And then we're actually going to work through some of these ideas in the book. So here's what I'm talking about. I don't just mean religion. I don't just mean politics. And I certainly don't just mean social issues. Imagine you have a 6-year-old. It's time for dinner. And you shout to the other room, hey, it's time for dinner. Go wash your hands. And your 6-year-old child says back to you, yeah, I don't want to wash my hands. In the chat, if you are courageous, tell me what you would say to that 6-year-old who you just told to wash their hands and they said, yeah, not gonna, don't want to. What would you do? What is your next move? I understand, but those are our house rules. Okay, there's an honest and very common, straightforward answer. Give me another one. You have to wash your hands. What else? Oh man, what's going on? Are you needing a few minutes to finish what you're working on? Amy, I want to ask you a follow-up to that. Are you still expecting that they'll wash their hands? Are you just making a little time for them to wash their hands? Yes. You can eat dinner after you're washed up. Ask why they don't want to. Yes, Amy is curious about the resistance, but she is also interested in hand washing. As soon as you wash your hands, you can come to dinner. Okay. You guys are wonderful. You're great parents. This is what we all do. What if, however, I were to tell you that when you ask a child a question, tell them to go wash their hands, and they come back with, I don't want to, you are actually not advancing the conversation when you say, you have to, it's the rules. The thing I would have said and did say is, well, you know, honey, there are these invisible things called germs. I go into explanation mode, and they live on your hands. And if you touch food and eat it, those germs are going to travel down into your body and make you sick. So we wash hands in order that you will not feel sick. And I would have been very proud of that as an answer, because I would have thought, see, I'm giving them a critical thinking understanding. I'm helping them do the right thing. How many of you have felt that by giving a really thorough explanation, you're bypassing just authoritarianism? Anybody have that style of parenting? Because I certainly did. I thought, oh yeah, that makes me a superior parent to do it because I say so, or you'll be spanked, right? And, you know, to be fair, yes, probably. It probably does make you a little bit better. Yeah, Kierna's would have been the answer about germs. All right. So let's interrogate why you believe that germs will make you sick. Because here's the truth. I'm not a scientist. So why do I believe germs make me sick or make my kids sick? Well, my education told me, some guy I heard on CNN, a book I read, articles online. I've sort of collected the habits of my family, the beliefs of adults. All of these have shaped my understanding that washing your hands before you eat is required. But here's the irony. If I were to pause and actually take seriously my child who just said, I don't want to, I might recall in that moment, that child ate 3 Cheerios off the floor like an hour ago. That baby of mine who has a pacifier, she just spit it out in a Target, and I picked it up. I licked it with my mouth and put it back in her mouth. How many of you have done that? You've literally licked a pacifier to remove germs and then put the pacifier with your saliva on it into your baby's mouth. How many? How many times have your kids had a snack without washing their hands and not gotten sick? A lot. So once we interrogate the belief that we hold, we start to see that some of these things are traditions and habits, and they have become parental prepackaged beliefs, propaganda pieces. And our goal through obedience training is to indoctrinate them into our convenient beliefs about life, because it's not very convenient to have the conversation. But what if you had this conversation with your child? The child says, I don't want to wash my hands. Now, by the way, caveat, you cannot have this conversation every time a child doesn't want to do something. I know that. Sometimes you just have to tie their shoes, stick them in the car seat, buckle them in, and go to Target. You don't have an hour to go down the rabbit hole about why they don't like their shoelaces tied. But every so often, maybe once a week, maybe once a month, maybe one child a quarter, I don't know, go down the rabbit hole. So what if you said, oh, why don't you want to wash your hands? Is it the water? And your child said, yeah, I hate the water. It's too wet. Well, is it the temperature? Hey, let's get a thermometer. I want to test the water temperature and see if there's a temperature you like. So we start collecting data that the child can actually watch happen. Then let's say they still don't like it and they don't want to wash their hands. We could offer an alternative. Well, you know, I have hand sanitizer. It dries more quickly. Do you think you'd like that? No, it's sticky. It's gross. So now you're stuck. You're like, all right, water, soap, hand sanitizer. What else kills germs? Maybe you do a little Google search and you find out heat kills germs. So you come back to your kid and you say, what if we just use a blow dryer on dry hands? We'll just blow dry your hands every night for the next week and see if that does a good enough job. If you have a truly recalcitrant child who still feels that you're cajoling them into your belief practice, this might be a moment to roll the dice, to just say, you know what? You're right. I don't know if hands that are basically clean, no mud is on them. I don't know if they're that dangerous. Let's just find out. Why don't you eat without washing your hands this week? And we're going to keep track and see if you get sick. Now, obviously in COVID, especially at the beginning, we weren't going to do that. We were going to use our parental authority to get cooperation. But you know what you can do in that moment if you don't have the opportunity to go down the rabbit hole? You can actually go further. You can get pictures from the internet that show what the germs look like. You can use a microscope checked out from your library and look at slides of skin cells. You can grow mold on a piece of bread to show them that the invisible becomes visible under certain conditions. You could actually help your kids collect data, have experiences, do their own research, and draw some tentative conclusions. This is what I mean by the parental propaganda program. We tend to go into the mode of our trusted authorities, even if we haven't spent much time vetting the information we've just taken as implicitly true. And your kids, by asking you those kinds of questions, are inviting a journey. So let's begin the PowerPoint now that you're all here. And we're going to work our way through this presentation. All right. I am going to see if I can make this open all the way. I know there's a way. Hold on a minute. It's difficult when I'm on Zoom. Okay, here we go. This should do it. All right. Growing Wise Kids in the Digital Age. This is my book that many of you have a copy of, so we'll just keep going, but voila. So when I went to write my book, a lot of people told me it was going to be boring. I did not like that news, by the way. I did not find that good. I was a little annoyed by it, frankly. And it was because people think of critical thinking as a very tedious academic topic. They were afraid that it was going to read like a dusty, dry textbook. I don't write that way. But boy, did that feel like challenge accepted, right? They threw down the gauntlet. I'm going to prove that this book can be interesting. So I started researching in my own brain experiences I have had that have been an example of where critical thinking really came into play. And I also was hoping that it might be about sex because I thought, you know, nothing like completely upending the expectations of a reader in the first chapter. Well, I was reminded as I did this reflecting of an experience that I had with my grandparents back when it was the 1990s. We're in the year 1997. My grandfather had just died, and my grandmother was suffering from dementia. She had been moved to an assisted living facility for people who needed memory care. And my aunts and I were gathered in one of my aunts' homes. I have an older Aunt June, who's a former nun, and a younger Aunt Siobhan, who was raised as a hippie, right? So very different worldviews and backgrounds, even though they had the same parents. As we were going through my grandfather's belongings, I opened up this box, and inside were a bunch of unstamped, unsealed letters in his beautiful penmanship. I opened the first one, and there was a love letter from my grandfather to my grandmother that he had just written within the last year. And here's what one of the lines said in one of the letters. Eva, remember when we climbed the little hilltop together where I first made love to you? Okay, I burst out screaming and laughing. I was like, June, Siobhan, get a load of this. I read them the sentence, and my aunt said, that can't mean what you think it means. My Aunt June, the nun. And I said, what? You mean sex? Come on, June. They may have done it. You know, I was kind of egging her on. My younger Aunt Siobhan immediately said, what? And they lectured me about my virginity. And so it was on. My younger aunt assumed that this storyline meant that she had, that my grandparents had had sex before marriage. And this was the controversy. My older Aunt June was convinced that they had not. A week later, I was talking to my mother, who is the oldest of these three daughters. And I said, Mom, what do you make of this letter? And she said, I know my parents. There's no way that's what it means. Well, here's the problem. If this letter had been written in the 1930s, I think my Aunt June and my mom would have had very firm ground to stand on. The word making love, to make love in the 30s, simply meant to put the moves on the woman of your dreams. We see it in the movie It's a Wonderful Life, where Mary says, Mother, George is making violent love to me. All she means is he's really being romantic. But by the end of the 20th century, to make love meant to consummate a relationship. And so the question before us was, did my grandfather use the original idiom to jog free his wife's confused brain and remind her of a happier time? Or had he updated his understanding of that language, because it was the late 20th century, and it was a secret confession shared between he and his wife that he didn't know his children or grandchildren would ever see? I've taken polls of my family members, of book club people, of friends, and it's really interesting. People my age and older typically think that they stayed virgins. People under 50, especially under 40, all don't think so. And I think it's fascinating to see the way our own unique experiences help us or require us to interpret this differently. So here's the point. Context is everything. We say all the time in publishing that content is king, but the truth of the matter is, in thinking, it's context that determines how you will think. And the thing is, context is invisible. It's very difficult to touch. We don't see it. It hangs around us as an invisibility cloak, but it isn't something that we are conscious of most of the time. When we think about critical thinking, then a lot of us tend to think of it as how to evaluate the other guy, right? Like how that other person's thinking is jacked up. But I think of critical thinking as something utterly different. Critical thinking is the ability to evaluate your own bias as it kicks into gear. It's the capacity to recognize that all the data that you receive is coming through a storyteller. And one of the chief things to ask whenever you're receiving new stories or information or data is just to ask the question, says who? Name that storyteller. I have the cover of The True Story of the Three Little Pigs on this PowerPoint because I tell the story in the book. When Noah was little, that's my oldest son, he was obsessed with the Three Little Pigs story. I retold it on walks, in the bathtub, every day. And one day I went to a library, and on one of their outward-facing stacks, this brand new book had just come out. And I thought, oh, this will be delightful. John Sheska is hilarious, and Noah will get a kick out of this book. So we brought the book home, and I read it to Noah, and his eyes widened. Suddenly, for the first time in his life, he was aware that there was another perspective. He had only ever heard an omniscient narrator. And now suddenly, the wolf is claiming to tell the true story. The question then became, could he recognize that this story was a half-baked defense? Or was he going to receive it at face value? When we are encountering multiple viewpoints, we have a habit of ignoring the non-dominant view. Let me say that again. When we know a story well, we are in the habit of not regarding the non-dominant view. We see it as an outlier. We immediately see it as suspect, even though in some cases, the outlying view ends up being a whistleblower or a person who is legitimately offering a perspective that deserves to be heard because it hasn't been. It's been shouted down or overlooked or suppressed. So when we are raising our children, one of our goals for critical thinking is to do what I call the academic selfie. So if you've got a phone, right, here's your phone, you're going to flip it around and you're going to look at yourself in the camera lens of your thought world rather than your face, right? And you're going to ask some questions. As I start to read this book, what do I hope will be true? Why am I nervous reading this article? Aha, this is the fact I need to win my argument. I wonder if I'll get in trouble for considering this idea. These are the thoughts that surface when we're starting to pay attention to our own reactivity, because that's what shapes and forms our beliefs. If we think back to my grandparents and my aunts, what was going on for them is that they wanted their parents to match the idealized image of them they held in their heads. They were unwilling to consider an image of their parents that didn't align with the perception they wanted to be true. The problem is this: when we create an illusion of what we think is true and we exclude other ideas, we can never be intimate. Intimacy in relationships is derived from an awareness that another person holds a unique and powerful perspective that makes sense in their lives. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. But the subject what I want you to take away from this is that in our current world and in the antithetical move that most people make when we're talking about thinking is they are driving for certainty. And certainty excludes the possibility of intimacy. It makes everybody conform to one perspective. I'm getting to this part that I want to read to you. The alternative to certainty is intimacy. Intimacy means knowing more of the subject with more of yourself. It looks like a greater and greater tenderness toward a field of study, a hunger to become close to it, to know its compelling contours and unavoidable flaws. It means reading the subject's ardent fans and listening with patience to its detractors. Intimacy leads to both a fascination with and protection of a subject's inherent value. In other words, when we enter this critical thinking arena, our goal is to know all aspects, to not exclude simply because it doesn't align. We're going to look at why that's powerful later. One of the issues that I discovered in my research is that there has been a belief in modern public education that our brains as little children are empty. And it is the job of the teacher, like a bird, to drop the food into this little empty brain, right? Just picture the bird in a nest receiving food from the mother, and that will supply it with all it needs to be well educated. Education reformer Paulo Freire takes a different angle. He actually says by the time we are school age, we are already full to the brim with experiences, socioeconomic conditions, religious beliefs, political associations, familial habits, the neighborhood we grow up in, personality and body traits, so much so that when the teacher is talking to a class of 30 different answers are pinging inside the brain. And yet, school drives for a single answer that all must accept on the authority of the textbook or the teacher. So let me give you an example of how this really becomes a madness. Think about the multiple choice test. I want you to look at this picture and I want you to see if you can guess what the right answer is. So which unit of measure would you use to measure this? And there's the image. Feet, centimeters, kilometers, or quarts. I'm opening up because I want to be able to read in your chat. I want you to put A, B, C, D in the chat. Which one is the correct unit of measure to measure what you see on this screen? A. Anybody else? All right, now tell me why you picked A. I'm curious. Why didn't anyone pick B? Any thoughts? Everyone's picking A. I find this fascinating. Here's the thing. We're looking for a unit of length, correct? We're looking for a unit of length. One of my friends presented this problem to me because her child picked B and he got it wrong. and they got called into the principal's office because he was contesting. He was contesting it. Yes, but Kierna, do you know why he picked B? Because he was measuring the illustration on the page. Imagine if you were sitting there reading this and literally it says, which unit of measure would you use to measure this? It doesn't tell us that the tree is in the forest. It tells us that there is an image on the page. And this child read it, made perfectly logical sense, and got it wrong. This is what I'm talking about when I say we have a homogenized education that is training us to guess what the authority thinks is the right answer, rather than actually consulting the logic and understanding that we could make. Here's another twist on this problem. Let's say we do assume that the illustration matches a tree that is not on the page. So we're not actually measuring the illustration. It's supposed to represent a real tree. Would a child who had grown up around bonsai trees see this differently? Might they think centimeters is the right measurement because they're thinking it's a bonsai and not a tree in a forest? Also, what if it's a super tall tree? Can't you still measure it with centimeters? You can. It's not illegal. It is a unit of length. And let's say we were tracing the progress of fire ants up a tree. Might we use centimeters to rate their progress up a very tall tree as opposed to feet? So the question we have in front of us was a legitimate question on a standardized test, and it was for students in the 5th grade. And my friend's son actually got the answer wrong, marked wrong, for a logical answer when there are 2 right answers on this page, even if we follow strict ways of following the unit of length, feet and centimeters. Okay, let's look at another one. I'm going to go ahead and stay in this view for a minute because I want to be able to see the chat. Try this one. Pick the adjective that describes this image. A, B, C, or D. Hot, cold, iron, or blue. Which one? Are you going A, B, C, or D? I bet you're on to us now because I have now seeded your imagination a little bit. Okay, so somebody said iron, which, oh my goodness, I just had, you guys just blew my mind. You blew my mind. I forgot that iron could be a descriptor of the metal. Very interesting. Yes. Okay, so here's the thing. There you go. AR said it, because it's unplugged. Because it's unplugged. But the right answer is A, because we associate irons with heat. And when we put it on a standardized test, we want the shortest distance between the thought and the right answer. We actually are testing all the time for stereotypes, for speed, for quick connections that most people would make. So what does that do to the nuanced, observant thinker? What does it do to the artist who is used to drawing and is thinking to themselves, well, it's unplugged. I see that it's unplugged. It can't be hot. But if we are testing for what's right based on stereotypes or based on accepted relationships, our kids have to learn that skill before they can even take that test. It's one of the reasons that homeschooled kids struggle with standardized testing, because they have not been indoctrinated into right answer thinking to the degree that their classmates have. They are not looking for the most obvious relationship. They are actually more willing to take risks and think their way outside of those conventional ideas. All right, let's keep going. So one of the ways that I discovered, oh, you know what? I'm going to get out of here again and close the chat. Okay, here we go. One of the ways that I wanted to help people understand the power of the way our own worldview shapes and influences us was by citing an example from when I visited Eastern Europe. I went twice. I went in 1983 to Eastern Berlin. And then literally about 25 years later, I ended up going, oh, it's more than that. It was like 30 years later, I ended up going to Slovakia. I was on one of those Blue Danube cruises with my mother. And one of the things that was jarring for me is when I got to East Germany, I was shocked when I went from west to east that the sun was still shining. Now, I know that sounds silly as heck. Obviously, weather is weather. So there's going to be blue skies in Eastern Europe, just like there are blue skies in Western Europe. But I had been raised in the nuclear Holocaust era, the fear of communism era, and all the negativity that I had heard about communists, about Eastern Bloc countries, had so warped me that I even imagined that the weather obeyed the conditions of communism. Isn't that amazing? When I got to Slovakia years later, this young woman, Sophia, had us up into her home in these Panelag buildings. These are from communist housing. They paint them in colors because they're otherwise so ugly. And we were up in her tiny little apartment. It was a 1-bedroom. Her parents, she and her brother had all grown up there. She had grown up there. She and her brother had to sleep on the couch and take turns. They didn't even get their own bedrooms. I mean, it was very small. So I was asking her, because her parents were my age, how do your parents feel about communism now that you're liberated? And Sophia said, as a young person, she loved watching television shows on the internet and traveling and learning English. But her parents had become so used to that way of life, they were finding the capitalist lifestyle really uncertain. Their medical care was not guaranteed, hard to find jobs, retirement not secure. And it suddenly struck me. I'm not saying that I'm supporting what communism has done. We've seen it fall and we've learned of its terrors, but we are shaped by our own realities. And so even if an American is going to point at that and say, oh, there's something wrong with it, the felt experience of the person who lived through it is so much deeper and wider and richer. And it actually shapes the imagination. And so ironically, I selected this example thinking it won't provoke anybody because communism is over. And then, of course, the war in Ukraine broke out 2 weeks after my book came out. So ironic, right? We can never fully escape the times that we live in. So the point is this: critical thinking starts with caring. We have to care to know ourselves well. We have to care to understand who the storytellers are. We have to know and go to the source and not only think that we know. Like, it matters to actually talk to people who lived in Eastern Europe, not just make up stories in our heads about their experience. One of the ways that we can start caring is to actually investigate the data. A lot of times we accept data that's put out without a bigger context, without understanding the implications, without even understanding if it's a fair representation. We saw this happening all the time during the COVID era. How's the data being measured and what are its benchmarks? We were all trying to compare COVID to the flu or to other diseases like cancer or to Ebola because we were trying to get a scale for whether or not the coronavirus was truly dangerous. Do you remember doing that in the early days? And so one person would shout, well, the flu kills this many per year, and we aren't even close to that with coronavirus. It must not be dangerous. And then somebody else would come back and say, yes, but the symptoms are so much more dramatic and long-lasting COVID is so much longer. And then someone else comes back and says, but it's not longer than MS, and you're constantly being forced to consider data. So the two questions you can start with your kids is, how's the data measured? What are its benchmarks? Let me give you a great example. I'm going to escape out of this for a moment so that you can just see me and we'll talk for a second. So I'm a huge sports fan, and so is my boyfriend. And we watch anything that has a ball. I grew up playing tennis. My dad and family, we went to a tennis club. I was in countless tennis clinics. So I've always had an affection for tennis. So one day I'm on Instagram scrolling through, and Naomi Osaka is being featured on a sports page. And she has just hit a serve for 192 miles per hour. And I'm flabbergasted by this. So I get home, I see my boyfriend. I'm like, you will not believe Naomi Osaka hit a serve for 192 miles an hour. And he pauses and he looks at me and he says, Julie, that's impossible. I said, Jim, I saw it. Don't tell me I don't have my facts, because this time I do. And he says, Julie, it's impossible. If a serve was hit that hard, it would actually injure another person if it hit them. And men can't even hit them that hard. I'm like, well, how hard can a man hit it? Maybe she beat a man. I'm just off in my delusion because I know nothing about speed, velocity, sports. I only know how to play. I don't know the data. And he says, well, the fastest serve on record for a man is about 150 miles an hour. As it turns out, the record is 157 miles an hour, and it's John Eisner. Women routinely hit serves at about 108, and over 120 is the record for women. So where was I getting this number? And suddenly Jim said to me, I said, no, I saw it. I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you. And so I got my phone and I found the screen picture. And he said, wait a minute, Julie, was she playing in the Australian Open? I said, yeah. He goes, could it have been kilometers per hour? Here we are again with the darn metric system. Lo and behold, he was right. The data was being measured in kilometers per hour, and the benchmark for women was much lower than what I assumed it should be. And so there you have it. Knowing how it's measured and what its benchmarks are enabled Jim to instantly see that the data I was passing off, this misinformation I was just sharing as though it was fact, he's able to deconstruct it. So I give you an exercise inside Raising Critical Thinkers that you can try with your kids to test that out, because it's really fun when you start examining data with those two questions. The second way you can help grow your kids' critical thinking skills through caring is through what we all worry about: online gaming, board games, card games, dice games, role-playing games. Everybody wants their kids to love board games, but pretty much all the other kinds of gaming we're all worried about, right? That's really, really common. Why do you think that is? What do you think's going on there? I think technology worries and scares parents. Wouldn't you agree? Most of us spend a lot of time worried that if our kids are playing a game, they are being influenced in a negative way. Their values, their beliefs, they're becoming violent. They're suddenly around kids that we haven't vetted. There's just a lot of fear around gaming. Interestingly, I did some data research and it's changing all the time. So I recommend continuing to look. But there are now longitudinal studies that verify that games, especially video games, actually serve our kids in a very powerful way, which I want to share with you now. Here are some facts about video gaming. Relaxed alertness leads to the best learning experiences. This is a kind of mental state that Renata and Jeffrey Kane, brain researchers, tell us is when a child feels a high challenge, low threat experience. Sports are a great example of this, where you have high challenge, low threat. Kids who are playing a video game experience a huge degree of control. They are on an adult machine, they are using a controller, and they make all the decisions, the strategy decisions, whether or not to reboot the game and start over or persist, whether to use cheat codes or not, new ways of upgrading their play. They are in the optimal experience of learning. And what the Kanes also tell us is that when kids have a sense of personal power and direction, they perform better. Usually that performance is tied to what they call thematic attractors. That means things kids are passionate about. So they can learn a lot on a unicycle if they love unicycling. They can learn a lot baking in the kitchen if they love baking. They can learn a lot playing video games if they love video games, because they're in that relaxed, alert state of high challenge and low threat. Gamers typically explore, experiment, and explain their gameplay, which helps them integrate what they learn. The longitudinal study of 20 years that they did of boys in particular show that boys who play 7 to 10 hours of games per week experience deep absorption, enjoyment, and healthy concentration compared with non-gamers. Isn't that incredible? Like, kids who play no games are actually more lonely, and experience less healthy concentration. Gaming also offers emotional regulation opportunities to kids in the same way that going for a run or watching TV offers self-regulation to adults. How does this go to critical thinking? Gaming is just one more way that we help our kids learn to adapt to incoming information using background knowledge to help them make good decisions. That's why gaming is valuable. Do they need to be playing it obsessively? Of course not. You can set the kinds of healthy boundaries for gaming the same way you do around sweets or watching television. But the goal is to not be punitive. It is to see that gameplay actually plays a role in the healthy development of how a brain solves problems, which is what critical thinking is really all about. The way that we become good at thinking is to start by recognizing how our identities make us the people we are. There is a way that our worldview is formed that I want to unveil to you now. So I call this the worldview grid. We have lenses, and then we have filters for those lenses for how we receive information. First, we come into the world as an individual person, and all of our beliefs are shaped by our perceptions. So if you're a baby and you're hungry, what do? You cry. If you're a baby and you're bored, you whine. If you're a baby and you want to reach something, you figure out how to crawl. Babies, small children, adults use their experiences and the way they perceive the world to guide them in the critical thinking they do, in the beliefs they adopt, in the judgment calls they make, in the way they see other people. But there is a second lens that we are constantly using that's a little more invisible to us, and that is the community identity we've adopted. If we're a member of a church, if we're the member of a synagogue, if we are a member of a political group, we might even be in a community like fans of the Bengals football team or birders, people who, go bird watching. We might be a part of a group that is political. Each of these community groups, homeschool is a great community identity, has a way of interpreting an individual perception to give it meaning. So for instance, you're an individual, your perception is that you're tired, the community is your family says bedtimes that are regular help you have a better night's sleep. And yet if you're a 6-year-old, you're like, I'm not tired. But the community logic story built from reason is that getting to bed consistently at an early bedtime makes you a happier person during the day. So the community logic story overrides, interprets, justifies, informs an individual perception. If we think back to what was going on with my grandparents in the opening slide, we had our individual perceptions of our parents, but we also had our allegiance to our communities. So my aunt, who was super religious, she wanted to see them and interpret that passage through the community logic story of the Catholic Church. My younger aunt, whose community is more of a hippie generation, they want to imagine that their parents maybe secretly didn't believe in virginity as the right model for before marriage. See how that works? See how the community story will influence the interpretation an individual gives to any given situation. The second way that we really grow our worldviews is through what I call the trifecta: reading, experiencing, and encountering. So I'm going to do this quickly because it takes up 4 whole chapters in the book, and I highly recommend reading it. Reading is the way we get most of our information. It's detailed. It's incredibly safe. You can read a book and put nothing of yourself at risk. You can read about war and never worry about a bomb landing on your house. When we read, we gather data to ourselves, but we do not ever have to experience feelings of threat, apart from, ooh, this topic makes me uncomfortable. As a result, when we form opinions based only on reading, a lot of times we short circuit a richer and broader understanding of the topic because we have not added experience and encounter. So here is Katrin reading about how to survive her freshman year at college. She's never been to college. How much do you think she knows about college from reading that book? I mean, she knows some things to test. She's learning what that person thinks is needed for surviving freshman year of college. But until she's been to college, would we say she's had a complete enough understanding to comment meaningfully on being a freshman in college? Probably not. The second image is when we did her college visit. And there we are at the University of Pittsburgh in the cathedral, which looks a lot like Hogwarts. And we walked around imagining her in the space. And now she had a much richer feeling about what it might be like to go to college. And she saw real, living, live, breathing action figures called college students. She got to talk to them and go on a tour. Encounter is when I dropped her off in her dorm room. And I said, all right, sweetie, you're on your own. Go to class, make your bed, love your friends, right? Now, everything she read, her fantasy from her experience is being put to the test. Reading, experiencing, encountering. Reading a travel guide, going to the country as a tourist, moving there. Reading about violin music, going to a concert, learning to play violin. These are the three components that create a rich and deep understanding of any topic. If you are short on any of them, humility is the right disposition because you don't know enough to actually meaningfully comment. Finally, let's introduce the rhetorical imagination. Imagination, we've found out from the research, literally is being robbed of our children in school. By sixth grade, most children have given up the imagination that they brought with them when they entered school because of testing, because of textbook teaching, because of the idea that there are right answers to get rather than insights to generate. I wanted to read this quote to you. Imagination is what makes our sensory experience meaningful. In other words, we actually interpret our senses through our imaginations. It enables us to interpret and make sense of it, whether from a conventional perspective or from a fresh, original, individual one. It is what makes perception more than the mere physical stimulation of sense organs. Imagination also produces mental imagery, visual and otherwise, which is what makes it possible for us to think outside the confines of our present perceptual reality, to consider memories of the past and possibilities for the future, and to weigh alternatives against one another. Thus, imagination makes possible all our thinking about what is, what has been, and perhaps most important, what might be. Here we go. In order for our children to be able to do that, to imagine a variety of perspectives, to hold multiple points of view simultaneously, they need freedom to draw some tentative conclusions, space to feel deeply, and support during the moment of crisis when what they're learning feels unsafe or risky or fresh or overturns something they thought they knew. And they need time to mull over the ideas and not draw conclusions right away. Any interpretation that they read or create lasts for a day, because the new circumstances of the interpreter will automatically impact the old meaning from yesterday. We're in a moment like that right now with what's happening with Roe versus Wade in the Supreme Court. The interpretation from 49 years ago is being reevaluated and potentially overturned. And everyone has 49 years more of data to discuss about this monumental discussion. A Supreme Court opinion is an interpretation, and it lasts for as long as it goes unchallenged and overturned. Psst, we're all interpreters all the time. All the time. The danger for us is that we try to walk a mile in someone else's shoes, but the truth is we can't always do it. Like men cannot ever know what it's like to be a woman. I can never know what it's like to be another race than white. Once we recognize that we have limits to our capacity to understand, we've entered a value that we call asymmetrical reciprocity. It is the willing to hear how it is for someone else without assuming I can know. It's believing and trusting that a person is giving me the authentic truth of what their worldview and experience is. Even if they give you a flawed version of it, it's still real for them. That's the beauty of starting to move into this critical thinking mindset. The greatest gift that we can give to our children then is to not exclude them from our families when they think their ways away from us. It's so easy to be tempted to think that our chief goal is to make sure they recite the mantras that are in the family and never change their minds. But too many membership communities use exclusion and excommunication as a way to treat people who don't agree. The healthiest communities embrace dissent and are not afraid of dissenters. Let your family be that kind of community. Most of you already have my book, so we will skip that. But if you want a free book club guide, you can download it there. And then these are links to our online classes and our curriculum at our store. You can follow me on Instagram at Julie Brave Writer or Twitter at Brave Writer. I'm going to escape out of here and stop my screen share. So we have a few minutes for some questions. To raise a critical thinker then is simply to be conscious of all the shapes and influences on them, and to be willing and open for those to have influence while you work it out together. Hi, Tammy.
Hello. So yeah, if you have any questions, go ahead and share them in the chat. I'm sure we can get Julie to answer a few of them. So she did mention she's had, this is what you said, presentation number 3 today.
That's all right. I love to answer questions. I really appreciated all the participation, particularly in the multiple choice test questions. I think sometimes it's really valuable to have the direct experience instead of just reading about it. So it was really fun to have you guys make the guesses and really think through with me how this works. The thing about my book is it is loaded with activities. And so you can do it over time. It's a resource you'll return to. And the activities are things like grammar and writing a poem about where you're from and understanding how your worldview intersects with your children. I think you'll really enjoy it. It's not heavy. It's actually a very easy read. I worked very hard to make sure that's true. Oh, good question. Go ahead, Tammy.
All right. Yeah. So Autumn asks, is there a best practice to stop your knee-jerk reaction of that's just the way it is?
You know, one thing I love to do is to surface my habits with my kids. So I might say something like, let's say the child is like, why do I have to be in a car seat? I don't want to be in a car seat. And you're like, oh my gosh, you have to be in a car seat, right? Like that's one of those ones where you want to just say, that's just the way it is. But you could say, gosh, you know what I want to say right now? I feel like saying that's just the way it is. This conversation is wearing me out. So let's put it on hold. I'm going to come back to it when I have more bandwidth for this conversation. For now, you got to wear your car seat and then come back. One mom that I talked to was telling me that her child just was refusing and kept unbuckling while they were driving. And it was a 3-year-old. So, you know, it's very hard to keep them in. So I suggested, why don't you try driving on a very safe cul-de-sac near your house. And every time your child climbs out of the car seat, you just pull over and stop. And you sit and wait until the child gets back in the car seat and rebuckles. And you do this for as long as it takes till they start to get the picture. And you can have a conversation while you're doing it. While you're out, it's unsafe. I can't do this. Can you see these other cars going by? What would happen if they hit you? Those are the kinds of things that you can do to help your kids start to actually make meaningful data research and experience collecting.
All right, so we have another question. I have my oldest enrolled to start kindergarten in a public school, but I have serious reservations. I want to keep my options open. My husband and I both went to public school. Any advice you have to balance out the conditioning of the school system would be greatly appreciated.
So the good news is when I wrote this book, it was not for homeschoolers. It was for all parents, because the biggest influence on your children's lives is still you. So if you are practicing this kind of thinking at home, it's going to enrich their school experience profoundly. They're going to be interested in the kids in their classroom to see how they think and live differently. They're not going to be thinking, why is that person weird? They're going to be thinking, oh, isn't this interesting? Another way to live. For instance, when I was growing up, my school district was mostly Jewish, and one of my best friends kept kosher. And the first time I ate at her house, I came from this California vegetarian home. Show up at her house, I'm not allowed to have milk on the table, but they're serving me hamburgers, right? This is a very big moment for me cognitively to recognize that there's this other whole way of thinking and being. I was supported by my families. They did not treat that like it was weird. They helped explain it to me. The parents of my friend explained themselves to me. So I think what you can do is really create the foundation for being open to experiences, evaluating what you're learning, and even being critical of the school system. Like maybe you don't think one homework assignment is worth doing and you give them permission not to do it. Like those are ways to take back your authority.
All right, yes. Carol shares in the chat, I'm actually a grandma and I'm seeing that my kids raise their kids differently. And rather than being critical, I'm trying to be open and understand they are raising their kids by their own experiences and in the current worldview. I'm sure.
Carol, you are such a rock star. Your kids are lucky to have you. You know, I was a breastfeeding, home birthing, homeschooling mama and a stay-at-home mom. And I remember before my oldest got married, I made peace with the thought that my daughter-in-law might have a C-section. She might bottle feed, she might work full time, she might put her kids in school. And I realized I had the freedom to make those choices. And I was going to be the kind of grandmother, the kind of mother-in-law that was a cheerleader, not a person who was critiquing. And that's what I hear you saying. And I just want to honor that. That's so beautiful. So beautiful.
Hey, do we have any other questions? I don't see any right now.
Oh, well, thank you. Here's the thing that's so cool about all of this. When you enter a space where it's not dangerous to think, to consider ideas that are different than yours, you actually build a lot of strength of character in yourself. And you start to treat other human beings as fascinating rather than subjects of conversion. We don't have to convince people, we have to be fascinated by them. That's what moves the conversation forward.
Thank you so much for this conversation. It was really inspiring and thought-provoking. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. Tammy is placing a feedback link in the chat for you, and we'd so appreciate a few minutes of your time to fill it out. Please join us as we kick off summer reading on June 4th with online programs for all ages. Tammy will put more details and links in the chat for that too. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, everyone.
Thanks for having me, and thank you for all the nice comments and for how much I enjoyed being here. I really appreciate you all showing up, and I'm glad I made it this time. Thank you.
So appreciate it.
Bye, everybody.